I'm assuming I'm muted now. Is that right? Am I muted?
Yes, we can hear you. We can see you. We're just waiting for the users to join in. In a couple of minutes, everybody will be in.
Okay. Oh, I think maybe I shouldn't be. Well, I don't know if I'm muted now, but sorry, I can't hear you. Arthur. Go. Yeah.
Abhishek, there are already 84 participants, 86 rather.
So we are expecting a little few more. So we're just getting. Shall we start?
No, I think we can wait for a minute or so because it's exactly 7 now. So you can wait for a minute so that the number reaches at least 150 to 200.
I think so. We should start, sir. Good evening and a very warm welcome to all those who have joined for this edition of Karmayogi Talks, being organized by Karmayogi Bharat in partnership with Capacity Building Commission. As you all know, Karmayogi Talks is a series of conversations we have with eminent persons on subjects that are relevant for public service. Today, we'll be having three distinguished speakers on a topic which is very relevant for India. We'll be discussing on driving innovation in Indian agriculture and water resources by leveraging India's digital infrastructure. And for this edition of Karmayogi Talks, we have none other than Professor Michael Kremer, who is joining us. He is the development economist and Nobel Laureate. He is a professor of economics and public policy at the University of Chicago and the founder director of the Development Innovation Lab at the Becker-Friedman Institute for Economics. He was jointly awarded on innovation, particularly in education, health, water, finance, and agriculture in developing countries. Through his prolific career as an academic, social entrepreneur, and innovator, his work has concentrated on the application of behavioral economics and political economy in development issues. In 2021, he was appointed by the G20 to the high-level independent panel on financing the global commons for pandemic preparedness and response. We extend a warm welcome to Professor Kremer for this edition of Karmayogi Talks. We also
Thank you. Sorry.
We also have with us today Manoj Ahuja, Secretary, Ministry of Agriculture and Family Welfare, Farmers Welfare. He is the IS officer of 1990 batch of the Odisha cadre. In his exemplary career spanning more than 3 decades, he has served in various capacities, including Chairman of the Central Board of Secondary Education, Commissioner Secretary, Steel and Mines, Sports, Youth Affairs, Personnel Training, and General Administration. He has a master's degree in Public Administration, MPA ID from Harvard University, and he has also authored several training modules and research papers. Currently, he is serving as a secretary in the Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare, and he is leading India's campaign as part of the India's Year of Millets, amongst other things. It's a proud privilege and is a prime driver for this edition of Karmayogi Talks. He is an IS officer of 1985 batch, Maharashtra cadre. He has 3 decades of exceptional administrative experience behind him. He has held several important positions, including Additional Chief Secretary to Chief Minister of Maharashtra, Municipal Commissioner Mumbai, and apart from the various positions in the state government and government of India, he has served in multiple leadership positions in the United Nations. He has been the global head of UNDP Geneva and senior coordinator of UNISDR. He has an MSc degree in social policy, participatory planning, and economic development from the London School of Economics and Political Science, and he is currently a member of Capacity Building Commission, which is reorienting the way we look at civil services in India, ensuring that we are able to build competency-based skills in all the civil servants. It's a pleasure to have you with us for today's session. As we deliberate on how do we drive innovation in agriculture and water resources by using India's digital infrastructure, we are all very well aware of how India's digital public goods, whether it's in the form of the basic building blocks of Aadhaar, UPI, the e-consent framework, the DigiLocker, has been used for delivering various public services to citizens at large. And now, riding on these various sectoral ministries, whether it's the health or education or agriculture, they are building public digital platforms to offer services, better services to various stakeholders. In agriculture, we have been working on using technology for improving farm productivity, using technology for giving serving as a decision support system for farmers. There have been AI solutions, use of IoT, sensors, all of it is being tried out. But to learn more about how we can leverage technology, how we can leverage digital infrastructure for improving innovation and driving improvement in agriculture practices or conserving water, we are delighted to hear from Professor Michael Kremer, and all those who have joined today are really looking forward to hear your insights on this subject, sir. So over to you, Professor.
Great, thank you so much. And sorry for coming in a little bit early. I guess I was very eager. Maybe we can bring up my slides. I thought I would first say a little bit about the experimental method and how it can be used both as a tool for thinking about policy and cost effectiveness, but also, and more broadly, as a tool for innovation in government activity. I'll discuss a few specific innovations, and in particular, we'll discuss the two areas where collaborating with the government of India most heavily right now on agriculture and use of technology and digitization in agriculture, and on safe water. But I think these techniques can be used broadly across multiple sectors. So I'll also discuss how governments can move to institutionalize this kind of innovation. And I'll present some quantitative evidence suggesting that we really can find ways to produce tremendous value by investing in innovation of this type. And then, very much look forward to hearing the other two presenters and having the discussion and hearing further from from others. So let me first discuss one case outside of agriculture and water, just as an example of how the experimental method can be a tool for isolating program impacts and informing policy. So one example, and how it in fact has, I hope, been useful to the government of India. So one area that I worked on early in my career was evaluating the impact of school-based deworming. As background, 1 in 5 people globally are infected with intestinal helminths, mostly soil-transmitted helminths, and they have historically been a very big problem in India. Now, there's medication for this, which is safe, effective, and very inexpensive, just a few rupees per children, and it's very common among school children. So the WHO, the World Health Organization, has recommended that all school children in endemic areas receive deworming medicine regularly. I was involved in a study which found that school-based deworming reduced school absences by around a quarter, and in fact benefited nearby untreated children through a lower transmission of disease. And we saw increased proportion of girls finishing primary school, entering secondary school. And then when we followed up long run, we saw an increase in income and consumption by about 13%. So you can imagine if there's something that costs just a few rupees per person and generates a 13% increase in consumption, at least in the context of that one study, that has phenomenal benefit cost ratio for governments. Now, in part, based on this evidence, first, several state governments, beginning with Bihar, started scaling up school-based deworming. But then the national government in 2015 introduced National Deworming Day. And this reaches hundreds of millions of children every year. So I think this illustrates how carefully evaluating impact can in fact help inform government policies, and in this case, help help the Indian government undertake policies that are fairly inexpensive and yet have quite substantial impacts. So let me turn to two cases that where we're before I turn to these other two cases, let me just say that that's an example where the innovation, the drugs were already invented, and the school-based deworming was also a bit of an innovation, but we were simply evaluating that impact, measuring the impact, and then making that knowledge available to policymakers. But I think and I do think that's an important role of experimental approaches. So when I'm talking about experimental approaches, this is very similar to A/B tests in technology that tech firms undertake, where they compare treatment group to a comparison group or try several different treatments against each other, and then decide how they want to modify their software. It's also obviously very similar to what the way that pharmaceutical firms use clinical trials to develop new products. But I think in the government context, this is ideally not a one-off, as in the case of deworming, where it was just measuring the impact, but rather it's really part of an innovation cycle, and ideally comes early in the innovation cycle, as in the case of A/B tests. So that starts with identifying issues through conversations with stakeholders or focus groups. It then can move on to developing candidate solutions. That can be partly based on literature review and further consultation with experts, but critically on the views of stakeholders in the context. And then once there are several possible candidate solutions, it's possible to carefully measure the impact of those using the experimental method to conduct A/B tests and refine solutions. This isn't typically a one and done. This is, there's a process of refinement, and then that eventually leads to something being scaled up. But of course, that's not the end. If you think about the issue of technology, for example, there's constant improvements in technology, constant new ideas opening up, and there's the opportunity to identify issues and begin the cycle again and have continuous improvement. Okay, so let me turn to the two examples that'll be the focus. And the first of them is digital services for farmers. So mobile phones create enormous potential for an integrated package of digital advisory services for farmers to boost production, increase farmers' income, and to help aid in climate adaptation. And the real gain of this would come from combining digital advisory, enhanced weather forecasting, improved soil information, and in fact, many of the other things that have already been raised, sensors and other things. But I think maybe the low-hanging fruit would be these three, but then that will only, as noted, that'll only be the start. So we've had wonderful opportunity to interact with Secretary Ahuja, both beginning when he was in Odisha before, and continuing in his current role. And we've been having a process of discussion on these ideas, and very much look forward to working together on this. And I'll leave it. I'll leave it to Secretary Ahuja to say anything more. I'm not sure what exactly we should say on that now. But let me say a little bit about the role that the experimental method has had here. Oops, sorry. Okay. Sorry, my slides are a bit. Yeah, let me start with this slide. I'd like to say something about the first, what's the impact of digital agriculture? So this will be the first role of just measuring impact. Now, I should say, these are studies of very, very basic systems. These are studies that were done earlier. Together with co-authors, we had an article in Science reviewing this. But I think you should think of these as a floor on what can be done, not as what can ultimately be done. So this summarizes the results of several different studies. Every row here is one study, and the dot represents the estimated impact. And then if you see the diamond at the bottom, that summarizes the impact across all the studies, putting them all together. And what we saw was that when certain inputs were promoted, there was an increased adoption of them through these very simple SMS-based systems with very, very few repetitions of 22%. Now, you might think in some ways that's modest, but in fact, because digital communication is so inexpensive, this is a benefit cost ratio of approximately 9-to-1. Now, more advanced systems and the integrated approach that provides information on more issues can have I think has the potential to yield much bigger impacts. But that usually takes a sustained effort in this type of iteration that I mentioned previously. So here's some work we did in not in India, but in another country, which had an interactive voice response system. Now, this was accessed by 3 million farmers. There were 600,000 new callers per year. This was not a country the size of India, but a smaller country. So this was quite a success for this country in a lot of ways. However, usage was fairly low, attrition was high, and the user experience was not particularly good. The system was pretty complex, covering 21 crops in multiple languages. So the team that was running this was really excellent. So they had done a lot of work promoting this by radio and other means to get farmers to call in. But when they asked us to take a look at the system, and we did that. And when we did, we identified some of these difficulties that I mentioned. So we worked with the government authorities and they were very responsive to that. They wanted to know about where things were working and where they weren't, and they wanted to find ways to improve it. So, what we came up by looking at the pattern of the data that was stalled from the phone calls to see how far people made it through the interactive menu. Did they actually get to actual advice, or did they get stalled before that? For example, on the language element, if you have to put in the language, if you put in the wrong language, then you might get stuck. And we found that, for example, replaying the language menu led to an improvement in actually getting things through. We also saw that removing some of the, there was a profile registration at the beginning, and getting rid of that, at least at the beginning, led to about a 20% increase in the fraction of people who got through, who got to content. Now, there were some things that we thought might work, but didn't work. So we thought adding a brief pause between options in the menu might give farmers more time to react and make the choices. But in fact, we didn't see this. But I think these examples both illustrate the benefits of carefully analyzing the data and iterating to try to improve the system. But they also suggest that it's very important to carefully test things, because some things that you think might work, like this pause between options in the menu, actually didn't have an impact. These may seem very micro, but very small details, but they can actually have a substantial impact, particularly cumulatively. I've just shown you some of the things that were identified. I'll show you some examples from India in a moment. So, as I've noted, I think the real gain will come from integration of digital advisory systems with other elements. And let me discuss two of them. First one is soil health cards. So the government of Gujarat collaborated with researchers to test and refine designs of soil health cards. And you can see the initial design. And when we tested that with farmers, we found that they were pretty difficult for farmers to understand. There are also issues with trust. So one study found that 70% of farmers in Bihar did not trust the soil health cards. This is a pity because there is evidence that site-specific nutrient management to match the soil chemistry can improve yield while reducing expenditure on fertilizer. And that, of course, would produce both environmental benefits and financial savings for the government. So, what was the process in this case? Well, we're collaborating with, or governments are collaborating with researchers, some of which I'm involved in, on digital agriculture in a number of ways. Government of Odisha is rolling out, or has, now 4 million farmers are on the system of improved soil. I should check that. The second bullet, that's an old. The total number of farmers getting advice in Odisha is now 4 million. I was just in an Odisha meeting, and I think these slides predate that. My getting the latest numbers, but there are a number of estimates, a number of efforts. But let me show. I'm just seeing. Unfortunately, I'm having trouble finding the slide with the new soil health card, showing the new redesigned soil health card. Okay, well, I'll just tell you the results. The new soil health card is much, much simpler. We found a huge increase in the number of farmers who could follow the soil health card and who could use the soil health card. There's basically applied human-centered design to the development of the soil health card. We found that combining the soil health card with information delivered, we tested delivering that with advice from an agronomist, with a video, or with the audio. And we saw, as you might imagine, the advice from the agronomist yielded the biggest benefits, but there were also, but the benefits were almost as big with the video and even with the audio. And of course, video and audio can be delivered to farmers who have smartphones. And although some farmers don't have smartphones, almost everybody has some phone, and that can be delivered with audio. So there's a huge increase in comprehension of the messages when the soil health card was accompanied by digital messages. Okay. Let me suggest something else that I think could take this a step further, which is to improve weather forecasting. So modern weather forecast techniques can allow more accurate forecasts, allowing farmers to adjust what inputs to use. And there's evidence that forecasts of the onset of the monsoon could be early enough to allow farmers to adjust the input use and decide, if it's going to be good monsoon or bad monsoon, how much inputs to use, what crops to use. There's evidence that even modest improvements in forecast quality could increase season profits by 43,000 rupees for the average farmer. That's based on a non-experimental study, but I think suggests the magnitude of the potential. And of course, digital agriculture could deliver weather forecasts at very low costs and at the appropriate times. Of course, one would want to use many media, not just digital agriculture. Okay. I think these are examples of some of the things that we hope to explore together with the Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare. But I hope that this will be just the beginning, and we will be able to explore a whole series of issues. But very much look forward to Secretary Ahuja's comments on this. Let me discuss one other example, which is cooperation with the Jal Jeevan mission. So again, let me start with the evidence and then talk about the innovation process. So there's pretty strong evidence that water treatment reduces childhood diarrhea. Now, until recently, there'd been limited experimental evidence on child mortality, but we developed such evidence and shared that with Jal Jeevan mission on the impact on child survival. So let me show you that evidence. So this comes again from a meta-analysis combining 15 different studies. So again, each row is one study. The circles indicate the effects in each study. The size of the circle is related to the sample size and thus the precision of the estimate. So larger samples get more weight in the analysis. And if you look at the bottom, the diamond summarizes the results overall and suggests that that addressing microbiological contamination in water by either through chlorine, most of these estimates are just chlorines, a couple use other technologies, could have a tremendous impact, saving about 1 in 4 child deaths. Now this is also extremely cost effective. It's extremely cost effective because chlorination, for example, is very inexpensive. But but we then tried to apply this to India. These are global results. In India, we found that based on these numbers, something like 1.35 lakh children could survive every year who otherwise would not survive, just from making the water clean. Now, that's on the benefit side, obviously huge. How about the cost side? Well, in India, the government is already bringing in piped water through Jal Jeevan Mission. And once the pipes are in place, that's the really expensive thing. That's 90% of the work, 90% of the expensive. At that point, it becomes very inexpensive to just add in the devices for chlorination. And of course, JJM's mission is to provide access to not just water, but to safe drinking water. So this could potentially be a very high value investment. And we've been talking to Secretary Mahajan and her team at JJM for starting since July, and I think we've made a fair amount of progress. Let me show you the type of thing that can be done. Here's an inline chlorination device, and that's a way to, well, first I should explain what the issue is. The issue is that even when there are pipes, if the pipes are there, if they're not on all the time, or if there are leaks, then there can be recontamination of the water in the pipes. And the chlorine will react with the contaminants in the water and not be available at the end of the line. So inline chlorination devices can ensure that the water delivered through the taps is safe, because they can just be placed near the, if say there's a multi-village scheme covering, I think there's a bit of noise on the line. Maybe somebody can mute. If there's a multi-village scheme, and when the water arrives to one village, it's no longer got the chlorine in, it could be the chlorine dose could be boosted to the appropriate level using these types of devices. Now, just to give a sense, these devices are quite inexpensive. The chlorine tablets only need to be refilled pretty infrequently, every couple of months, every couple of weeks, somewhere in between that, depending on the setting. The refills cost only about 250 rupees each. So again, this could have a tremendous impact on child survival at very low cost. But there's a huge challenge that JJM and will need to work out on how do you set up the systems for not only installing these devices, but ensuring refill, maintenance, monitoring. And I think there's a big role, or potentially a very big role, for digital monitoring there, because it's possible to attach sensors to these devices to measure the chlorine levels and the flow rates. And that in turn could be part of a larger system. It's not technology alone, it's a combination of technology and a human system that I think could make this very effective. Okay. So I've mentioned a few examples of innovations where the experimental approach, I think, played a role. The deworming is an example of, I think, huge success that the government of India has already achieved. Worm levels are actually falling quite dramatically in India in the parts that have been subject to this program. But I also want to acknowledge, and I mentioned one example of testing, several changes in digital agriculture, and some of them worked and some of them didn't. So if we look at things systematically, is this a good investment? There are plenty of examples of failed experiments. And another question is, how can we promote this and how can we design investments in innovation? So first, let me give you some, on scientific research and development, sort of new seeds, new health research. There's an estimate found that public investments in research and development, this was a US study, had an annual social rate of return of 55%. So obviously a phenomenal return. If anybody could make that in the stock market year after year, they'd be rich. But there had been less evidence on the returns to social science experiments or randomized controlled trials, or to social entrepreneurship, impact investing. And there are certainly plenty of anecdotes of success, some of which I've shared, but there are also anecdotes of failure. So we tried to take a systematic look at this by examining the experience of a part of the US government called Development Innovation Ventures, which I helped set up and where I'm currently serving as scientific director. So I don't want to claim that I'm an unbiased party here, but let me show you the results. So this was set up just over a decade ago, I guess a little bit longer than that. My slides are slightly out of date, my notes. But these are the 43 awards we made at the beginning of our portfolio. We wanted to allow some time for these to scale. And this was with the first $16 million. So, which would be roughly 1.3 billion rupees. And what we found was we reached more than 100 million people out of those. The innovations went on to scale, some of them, not most of them, as I'll come to in a minute, but the portfolio as a whole, the cost per person reached was about 16 rupees per person reached. So I think that, as I say, I'm involved in this program, but I think I'm pleased to say that this compares favorably to a lot of programs designed to help startups. And I think the reason has something to do with how the program was designed. So let me say a little bit about the design of the program. I'm hoping I don't have that on a slide, so I'll just say this. So the basic structure of the program is that we give very small grants for piloting. But we don't give larger amounts of funding until there's evidence of impact and cost effectiveness. And I think that, with research and development, with innovation, you have to take some risks. But the real challenge, the real danger is that you start throwing good money after bad. And particularly if this is government funding, sometimes governments can do that. So the approach we came up with in designing this was saying before larger scale funding can be developed, we need a very rigorous test of both impact and cost effectiveness, and we'll pay for that testing. That rigorous test was not always a randomized controlled trial and experiment, but in many cases it was. And what we found was that I think that might be one of the reasons, this is speculation, but I think that might be one of the reasons why we reached so many people with this. Let me mention a couple of other things. First, most people were reached by a small fraction of the innovations. 9 out of 41 reached over 1 million people, and that accounted for 98% of the people reached, and likely generated most of the return. And I think that's very typical. If you're a venture capital firm and you know that a lot of your investments aren't to give you most of your return, but if you invest in a Google or Facebook, you're going to be very profitable. And I think from a government perspective, investing in social innovation with this approach of rigor and selection, I think can be very impactful. We actually then, I actually prefer not to focus on this number of people reached, because you can get into all sorts of arguments about how do you define that, what do you mean? But the measure that I prefer to focus on is what was the ratio of cost to benefits. So I told you that we spent $16 million on this. So by the end of 2019, when we put together this analysis, we found that the benefits by that point were already 17 times as high just for the 5 investments where we'd quantified the benefit. Now, if the benefits stay at the same rate, this would be substantially higher by the end of this year. But I think it's actually going to grow faster than that. I think we'll have more people reached, but we haven't updated the analysis, so can't be sure about those numbers. But this is our projection for the extending to 2023, a crude projection. I'll just note that the program which reached the most people was actually a technology program in India. So this was software for community health workers, basically software for Ashas to use. And this was demonstrated. So if you look at the far right of the scale, and you see I couldn't even fit it in one slide, so there's a little discontinuity mark there. 60 million people, and again, this was over 2000 by 2019, had been reached by in India alone, in terms of the number of people served by Ashas who had the software on their smartphones to help guide them in providing advice to their clients. And there was evidence that this led to improved delivery in facilities and improved health outcomes. So this yielded substantial benefits. I should note that one other aspect of this, well, let me note a couple of other aspects of this, actually. One is that we broke the analysis down, and obviously maybe I'm especially biased on this one because I'm a researcher, but we compared the rate of scaling by whether or not there was a randomized controlled trial, an experiment involved. And I think sometimes people are concerned that conducting an RCT, conducting an experiment, that's time consuming, it's expensive, it slows things down. But actually what we found was that there was a much higher rate of scaling among innovations that were tested that way. For example, this community health worker software. And I think the reason for that, I think there are 2 reasons for that. Again, this is, we can't prove this, but I think one is that good organizations are using this not just to judge, using the experimental approach, not just to evaluate things and to say, this is good, this is bad, success, failure, but rather to be part of this process of continuous improvement and to make their products better and better over time. And I think just like the private sector is using A/B tests to make better and better software over time, governments, I hope I've given some examples, governments or firms serving them can use A/B tests to make their products better and better over time. And the second reason is that I think researchers in economics, I think had a very ivory tower approach at some point. Certainly we're charged with that, and I think there was some truth to that charge. But I think there's been a huge shift in the profession over the past 20 years, with India being very much at the forefront of that, with a move towards much more focus on practical problems, on developing solutions to those problems, on working together with policymakers on this type of iterative process, long-term relationship over time. And in the process, researchers have come out of their ivory tower and now I think are useful parts of the innovation process in development economics, the same way that they are in, say, tech or in ICT or in biotech. So, I think this approach could be institutionalized within governments. Development Innovation Ventures is one example of that, but I think there are other examples as well. For example, Chile set up an experimental policy initiative as part of under its finance ministry that worked with researchers, worked with researchers in Chile, worked with Chilean researchers who are working internationally, and worked with other international researchers to develop innovations, rigorously test them, refine them, and scale them up. And I think actually the person who used to lead this program is now working at the Development Innovation Lab at the University of Chicago. And we're very excited about our collaborations with the Ministry of Agriculture and Farmer farmers' welfare, and with the and with Jal Jeevan Mission and Secretary Mahajan there. And that's obviously taking a lot of our time right now. But longer run, I think there are many, many researchers in India and globally who would be very excited to work with the Indian government, whether that's central ministry. This was set up under the finance ministry, but this could be set up under other line ministries or by state governments. And we'd obviously be interested in talking about this, but I think many other researchers would as well. So happy to help in any way that we can within our limits of what we can handle in terms of staff. We do have a staff, but a finite number, and happy to help make connections to others as well. So I very much look forward to hearing from Secretary Ahuja next, and look forward to any questions and discussion.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. That was really, really engaging with regard to how data can help, and whether it was the deworming experiment or the soil health cards or Jal Jeevan Mission. And as you explained that the benefits, the social benefits far outweigh the investments that we have had. So with this in mind, we now move on to get the comments from Manoj Ahuja sir and Praveen Pardeshi sir with regard to any questions or any inputs or any suggestions that you may have with regard to basically the experience that you have had in the public service.
Can I come in, or would Praveen?
No, you go in first.
Can we have the slide?
We can.
Yeah. So thank you, Abhishek, and I just wanted to just add to what Professor Kremer was saying, and also the way forward which we are thinking in working together. There are two big ideas which came through. One, which you gave yourself, Abhishek, about the public digital infrastructure, and how do we, when we talk about digital agriculture, that's the concept we have kept in mind while designing or doing what we want to do in digital infrastructure, which means that you essentially set up interoperable modular building blocks. So you're designing something for the future. It's just the architecture with standards which will allow people in the ecosystem to innovate, or even technologies which are not there right now to become a part of what you're doing. And that's a big idea. That's one thing we are doing. And what Professor Kremer was pointing out, I think it's very essential while we are doing something to have informed knowledge about what you're doing. And he's made a very strong case about innovation based on experimental design. How do we institutionalize it? And he's also pointed out, given facts, that it's a worthwhile investment to make. The three examples he cited, I think one or two I was associated with about the mobile phone. I think these were the problems we were facing. We have a lot of advisories for the farmers, and this was when I was at the state level. Same problem. Don't know whether the farmers are actually benefiting from the information we are giving. What is the usage rate? Is it very low? Very, very low? Are they dropping out? Are there repeat calls? Is the information useful? How is the user experience? But we were just going around, and there was no way for us to know how do we improve it. And then this digital mobile experiment, which we started in Odisha, was essentially based on this. So it took a little bit time to take off, but I'm very happy to know with the figures Professor Kremer was showing that it's really picked up. But it was based on this finding out, small experimental designs to find out what's happening. And so I think it's very, very useful. The second thing I think I would just like to mention about soil health cards. We have huge systems. There are 14 crore farmers. We have 20 crore soil health cards. But our important aspect is the farmer using the information which is available in the soil health card? Is he accessing that information which is available? Now, this point which he made, just a human-centric design and making the template or how it appears to a farmer, and you could push it through maybe video or audio depending on the phone he is using, are very important elements in ensuring that the efficiency increases. Similarly, the weather forecast and the fact that per farmer, if you provide information which is timely, accurate, and contextual, can really benefit a farmer. What I see in digital agriculture, and Professor Kremer, I would like you to come on to that. Fundamentally we agree, and that's what we have been discussing about, to institutionalize this experimental design. I see digital agriculture as an information issue. Getting the right contextual, timely information to anybody. It could be the farmer. The farmer has needs regarding what input do I require? Is it of the required quality? It could be about agricultural practices. It could be about weather advisory. It could be about soil. It could be about marketing. But if you narrow it down to one sentence, it's all about an informational issue, and how digital technology can kind of deliver that. And as you pointed out, since there's so many options about doing things, it's very important to institutionalize the experimental design, as you pointed out. And what will help me also is to, are there any metrics or rules of thumb? How does one prioritize? What does one do? How can one prioritize? Because I'm sure there is an opportunity cost to what you pick up, and there is also a time cost. It does take time, whatever, an experiment. Though in the long run, it's a much better thing. But how do you prioritize? And the fourth thing, can we blend both, gold standard random experiments and small kind of experiments which can probably give you more generic results, are not so precise, but very helpful in taking broad generic decisions. So I thought these were some of the questions I thought I'll put up to you.
Very interesting. Sir, Praveen, sir, would you also like to have a few queries so that then we can address them together to Professor Kremer?
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. Very interesting. And I'll just take up two issues. One, as Professor Kremer was talking about water. That one of the things in terms of the climate modeling for the state I come from, Maharashtra, I said that there will be far less rainier days, and drip irrigation, which is plastic-based, supply of water to the roots, helps to both save water and higher productivity, but it requires power, and most of the power is coming from fossil fuels. So we tried to work on putting solar pumps, but then we have free electricity from the grid, so people don't go for solar pumps that easily. So are there any innovations that we can nudge people to move away from the because it's very difficult to shift over from free or very subsidized electricity to get people to, let's say, even share the cost of solar energy, though it's free afterwards. So that's one thing that I wanted to bring to your notice. The other was, of course, this weather example, and I think it also partly comes from Maharashtra, that moderate increase in short-term predictions or moderate term predictions. I just wanted to tell that before we can reach that level of moderately reliable prediction, a huge public investment in terms of disbursed automatic weather stations was needed, which Maharashtra had done. But that wasn't all, because when we put up 2,600 automated weather stations, we knew that they wouldn't be maintained and in remote locations. So actually the more important innovation there was the type of procurement process, where we put a private agency like SkyMet to actually be able to sell part of the analytical data so that they were forced to maintain them. And that's what improved the reliability. So basically, I just wanted to also ask you that, how can we move away from the short-term weather predictions, which our weather systems are doing? That is 1 day, 2 days, which doesn't really help the farmer, to more moderate time, which is like 7 days, 8 days, or even 1 month in advance, because that's what helps the farmers to change input and crop patterns. So that's it from me.
Would it make sense for me to respond to these?
Yes,
Great.
yes.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for these wonderful comments. I think they're spot on. Why don't I start with the observation that the importance of the investment in the weather stations. I think that's absolutely right. To get full value out of out of this type of innovation, you need high quality information going into it, so that you can deliver accurate messages to farmers. And that there's weather forecasting is a rapidly evolving field, and there's some exciting ideas about how you can monitor from satellite or other ways. But in this case, the ground truthing seems to have been very important to develop better forecasts. And of course, another point that was raised was about procurement. And in general, I realize procurement is a very complicated matter, but I think that procurement is an area where we also need innovation. And I'll give two examples. One is, when you're talking about technology on designing systems, there's often very small differences in how something is designed can have very big impacts on quality. And so having a procurement system that rewards quality as well as rewarding low price is really important. But then that requires, that has to be approved. I don't know about India. In the US, this has to be approved by lawyers, but there's been a lot of innovation in design of procurement systems. And one of the things that we're launching at the Development Innovation Lab, we just got a grant for this, is a market shaping initiative. So I'll just mention, in the case of edtech software, how do you set up a system to measure and reward quality? Maybe there's ways to reward the producer of the based on the results. You have to also think about how this is going to integrate in with the human system that the state government has set up. I think that's a very important area for work, and if we can be useful on that front, I'm also happy to explore that. I'll note that the similar issues apply to soil chemistry as well. Just like you need accurate weather forecasts, and I do think some of these new, I'm not endorsing any one thing, but I heard there's a forecast from the Netherlands that backcasted matched 10 of the last 10 monsoons and gave that extra seven or longer time. I don't remember exactly how long, but gave forecasts that were early enough for farmers to adjust their input. So I think that can be helpful on soil chemistry. There are ways to monitor this from space. I think there are, at least some studies suggest that, unfortunately, low correlations between the chemistry of soil chemistry tests and the subsequent soil chemistry tests. So developing the human system or the management system to do back checks to make sure these tests are accurate, to contract with other providers of the services if necessary, or to supplement this with satellite data, I think could be very, very helpful. So that's all on the agriculture, specifically to agriculture. Then broadening this out a bit. Oh, I'll say one other thing on agriculture. The discussion of drip irrigation and power and solar. And this relates to Secretary Ahuja's comment about these all being information interventions. I should be clear. I think information interventions can sometimes do a surprising amount, but ultimately, farmers are going to respond to incentives, and right now, the entire system of subsidies and of guaranteed prices creates certain incentives, and this is obviously a political decision, but I think it is worth experimenting with adjustments to that, and some things will not be politically acceptable or will not be what the government decides to do, but there might be some opportunities to make some adjustments and try them out, even on so for example, subsidizing drip irrigation and solar pumps and seeing if that helps. So I'll just say one more thing on the larger questions about the usefulness of other approaches besides the experimental method. And I agree, sometimes sometimes you need to make a decision right away, and there's not time for an experiment. Some experiments can deliver results pretty quickly on understanding of soil health cards. Others are going to take more time to deliver results. And I think it makes sense to use a whole range of methods. I myself use a range of methods in my research, but I wanted to start out in the area that the Nobel Prize was for. So.
That's very interesting to learn. I was just wondering, like, we have seen several interventions, so many of which you have mentioned, and we also have seen applications of technology for improving productivity. In fact, I was looking at a project which was done very recently in which they had put sensors in the soil, which was measuring the moisture content in the soil, and then using an AI-based modeling, linking it up to the rainfall data, and trying to predict how much irrigation should the farmer give. And it was a mobile app which would give an alert that you should run the submersible pump for, say, 2 hours or something. And then they had further value added on it and built up an IoT device in which actually the farmer would not even need to operate the pump, but the system will automatically irrigate for the requisite number of hours. So it would result in optimal irrigation plus result in power savings, water savings, everything. But what we have seen is that many of these interventions, while they seem to offer a lot of value, but in order to scale them up and in order to ensure that more and more farmers use, either the farmers are convinced that it results in the value and they invest in these interventions, or the state funds it. So which approach would you suggest? Like, should we work on awareness building and ensuring that farmers invest in such intervention themselves, or should it be pushed by the state?
Right. So
can I sort of just intervene on that? Because I wanted to have a related issue. Because, this is very important what Abhishek just said. As in India, most of the spread of agricultural innovations is a public good. It's not really a private good, like, you have a private company, because whether it is extension services, it's government staff, whether it is agricultural laboratories, these are government people. So here we have public servants, and then there are innovations, and sometimes the capacity is the issue. In fact, that's one of the main concerns of the Prime Minister when the Capacity Building Commission, to which I belong, was set up. That is, how do we enhance the capacity of public servants to deliver these types of public goods, which in many other countries are actually being delivered by the private sector. So this is really an issue I would like to add to what Abhishek just said.
I think this is a very important issue. So thank you for raising it. There are a number of, I think a lot depends on the sector and on the specifics of the situation. And I think economic analysis can be useful here. There are some innovations which are going to be profitable for consumers to adopt, or for producers to adopt, farmers to adopt. And those ones, there'll be some private incentives to invest in developing those technologies because there's a possibility of making a profit from them, in some cases a large profit. Then there'll be other cases, and this is true in agriculture, it's true in many sectors, where the social benefit of the innovation is very high, but the private profit opportunities are not as large. And there, I think there may not be sufficient investment from the private sector, and there's a very important role for government. So what are some examples, and how can economic analysis help in distinguishing these cases? Well, one case is if this is something that is, if the innovation is something that doesn't just deliver benefits to the consumer, but delivers benefits to others. So if this is, for example, reducing water usage, well, that helps not just the individual farmer. In fact, it might not help the individual farmer that much if they're not paying for water and they're not paying for electricity, but it does help the society as a whole. So those types of innovations, I think, definitely warrant some government investment. And of course, that investment could be through the public sector or through setting up appropriate contracts to encourage the private sector to invest in them. Another category is improvements in provision of government services. So governments are providing extension services, and there are some examples of private sector players doing this, but basically this is a function that governments usually provide. Or in education, governments are providing the vast majority of primary school education. Although again, there's some private entities, private schools. So if the government is providing the service, it's very hard for the company that develops the innovation to really make huge profits. It's not as attractive for them because the government, of course, will not want to they will want to save budget and not pay a lot for this, and they're the main customer. So it's not very easy to say, well, we'll just keep a high price and not sell to the government. And in fact, I think the example of software for community health workers to use on their phones is a great example of this. Government of India was a customer for this, but government of India naturally over time it sort of thought about who do we want to offer the contract to, and I think and switched the contract. That's I'm not suggesting that was a bad decision in any way, but it does limit the profits for the firm that makes the investment, which means that it's important to supplement private funding for research and development and improving government services with government funding for improving R&D and developing government services. My sense is that there's particularly strong rewards to this type of neglected areas of innovation. And to the extent that government programs to encourage innovation some share of that can be for innovations, reserved for innovations to improve government services or to address problems like climate or water shortages, or help innovations that could reduce the government bill on subsidies. Then I think that would be very useful.
That's very, very insightful. We have a lot of questions in the Q&A box. I wonder how much time we have. We initially scheduled from 7 to 8, but can we take some of the questions in the Q&A?
I'm happy to stay.
Okay. So I will just pick up a few questions. 1 second. Like Anshuman Kamila has a question like, my question is, given the high cost of randomized controlled trials, is there a thumb rule we can use for developing countries where extrapolating results from another setting to a local context? Can we do that?
Great question. I'll take two parts of that question. I think the first one has to do with extrapolating results from global evidence to a local setting. And I think good policy is both grounded in the local realities, but it's informed by the global evidence. And it's useful to think about what are the underlying lessons for, not just about the specifics, but of this particular program worked, but what are the underlying generalizable lessons? So, for example, I'll give a water example. We've talked a lot about agriculture. There's a finding across many countries that human beings, this is a behavioral economics finding. Not all people always invest optimally in preventive health. And there's a role for subsidizing that and covering some of the costs. So I think that's something that probably applies to this context, and also to some extent, the impact of clean water on survival. That's a basic biological process, which is probably similar across contexts. But then there are also things that are specific. So some parts of India have arsenic, some parts of India have fluorides. Well, then, while addressing the biological contamination that causes the majority of deaths is important, if there's arsenic or fluoride, you also have to address that problem. And how is the government of India going to set up a system for monitoring whether these systems are used over time, and what's the optimal role for the panchayat, for the state, for the central government, and how that is something that is going to require a lot of context-specific knowledge. So I think you want to combine both, and to the extent you can think about what are the driving principles, that might give some guidance as how to combine them. The other issue is just how can you save money on research? And I think there's lots of techniques to do that, and lots of thought needs to go into that. There's some, there's some things can be evaluated pretty inexpensively, like, it's a small sample of farmers to gauge their understanding of soil health cards. Other things, if you're looking at the impact of an education reform on learning, well, that takes time, requires a large sample. It'll be more expensive. But there may be ways to, for example, using data that the government's collecting anyway, that could radically reduce the cost. So happy to, I think we at our team at Chicago in the Development of Innovation Lab, both happy to brainstorm about ways to do that, and also to try to connect people with the relevant researchers. And obviously there are JPAL, Poverty Action Lab, is an extensive network in India. Other groups like CGIS are working with state governments on these activities. So I'm happy to promote our University of Chicago relationships, but also very happy to link you with researchers who are working in the areas that you're interested in.
That will be very great. In fact, there have been several queries with regard to people who want to collaborate, who want to learn more, who want to get associated with the researchers. So on the Karmayogi platform that we have for capacity building, we do have a section on, we have a discussion forum and we have a networking hub. So maybe we'll try to get people, those of you who have logged on to the Karmayogi platform, maybe you can join the discussion hub on this topic that we will start on the Karmayogi platform. Maybe we'll connect you to the researchers at U Chicago and their associate partners, so that we can work together for the common objectives. There is one question from Mr. Rakesh Kumar which probably would be best answered by Manoj Ahuja, sir. It says, farmers should know which crop is beneficial for his area and correct method of farming. How can it be achieved, say, at Muzaffarpur district of Bihar? The important aspect which is causing attrition of farmers from their job and searching labor jobs in industries. So how can this data be made available across geographies with regard to what crop, how cropping practices, brothers?
So I think that it's a matter of both gathering the good data as we heard from the example of weather forecasts in Maharashtra, and then communicating that data to farmers. Ideally, this gets to the point where this is an interactive process and the farmers themselves are involved, so that after, if again, this is an area where A/B tests could be helpful, but just ask, even short of, in the spirit of the question, what can be done when you're not doing an A/B test? Well, you could just ask farmers, did you try this advice? Was it useful? Were the results good for you? And maybe that information could be communicated back to other farmers in that area. It could be aggregated and communicated back to other farmers in their area. So that process would have to be thought through carefully. But I think there's a lot of exciting opportunities, and very excited to be working with Secretary Ahuja, with the ministry, and potentially with and with state governments on trying to address their challenges.
Would you like to add something, sir, Manoj Ahuja, sir? Because there's another question from Smita Mishra with regard to, is there a public database of challenges faced, failed projects categorized by geography or area of impact? How do you share your learnings on an initiative for other geographies to learn from your efforts?
So I'll answer the previous question first. And I think that's the fundamental issue which we are trying to tackle. And let me say that there is enough knowledge available, which hypothetically, if we are given an environment where we can share it with the farmer one-to-one, and it's all available in a place, it can be done. You have knowledge about soil, about weather, about markets, about risks. So everything probably which he requires is available. The whole challenge is now digitally, providing it to him, spatially where he's located, whether it's Uttar Pradesh or whether it's Bihar, temporally, when does he want it, domain specific, what is the depth of knowledge does he want on a particular subject? Suppose there's a particular thing, there's a particular pest attack, all that knowledge is available. But our challenge is to fine tune it, make it precise, and get it to the person in time. And then he takes a decision based on his incentives and all. I mean, it's all gets linked. Like it will have a public architecture, which you pointed about. Second, getting all the investment in infrastructure, like weather-related or soil-related or issues like that, which will make it, all this comes together and makes it meaningful for a farmer. One thing which set me thinking was the discussion about, the work which is being done by your team with Basini and things like Chat GPT, which technically, if you put all the volumes which are available, let us say in a public research system and put it in one brain, like a farmer brain, and then it's able to take it and, convert in a human manner, convey it to a farmer. I think that's one big potential area because which can work. So they're very promising technologies, the ways we are doing things and the architecture which is there, informed by experimental design. I think the building blocks are there. We need to put it together to reach the future. Second thing, yes, it's a very good idea. We publicly, we don't have an inventory of failed public projects and all. I think we should invest in and also know what happened and why it happened and make it available to the public.
Thank you, sir. That's really, really useful. So I think most of the questions have been done by and large. Pardeshi, sir, would you like to add a few things?
Wanted to talk about this long-term weather predictions because I worked a lot in the UN during the the disaster management issues. So unlike northern climates which have air mass based systems, large air masses, the prediction over long range, including moderate range time, is much easier and very consistent. For monsoonal climates, while short-term and even very medium-term, which is maybe a weak type of predictions are developing, really long-term predictions, which are consistent and accurate at a micro level, are still under a development stage. So therefore, I mean, saying that will happen may not be that true. Instead, we'll have to do more contingency-based approaches. That is, you have a contingency-based cropping strategies and insulation against climate vagaries. These insulations are basically drip irrigation, water harvesting structures. All of this can help a lot more because we can't rely only on the accuracy of long-term climate predictions for a monsoonal climate. This is what I think so.
This is definitely an area, I totally agree. This is a harder challenge, and it's a perfect example of where the private sector resources may not match the social needs. The private sector resources have gone, first, they're going to forecast for high income countries. And I think we need, I think India can do a lot with its resources in improving, advancing weather predictions within India. But I think we also need a global effort to invest in improving weather forecastings outside of the temperate zones. And many countries around the globe could benefit from this.
Great. So what we will do is that we will continue this discussion on the Karmayogi platform discussion forum. So we will conclude, but before we conclude, I will request Manoj Ahuja sir and Praveen Pardeshi and Michael Kremer for their last concluding remarks before we conclude this session of Karmayogi Talks.
I think this session has been very interesting, Abhishek, and technology in agriculture, since you talked about digital agriculture, is the future. When we're talking about getting incremental or higher returns up, over the business as usual, it plays a very strong part. And it's very important that as we move ahead, we invest wisely, we build an experimental design so that we optimize our innovation. It's a structured way of innovation in government, which we need to put in place. And since you're hosting it on the Karmayogi platform, I think it's a very important area for making people across the government aware of this and build up their capacity so that they start demanding these kind of things. And that's how it will get built up over. So thank you very much for having me on this session.
Thank you, sir.
I'll also want to thank Abhishek and of course Professor Kremer and Secretary Manoj ji, because this not only helps us to think strategically but also benchmark to the global best. because all the time, in India, we know we have a lot of knowledge, but also comparing it with the global best helps us to, set these standards higher. And what I saw from the question answer sessions, there were more than 200 people consistently on the talk, and there were lots of active questions from various agricultural universities. So I think we should not only answer them on the side, but keep this discussion platform as one of the hubs of I got active on a long-term basis. That's it from me.
I would just add that, I think, so I'm going to be chairing a commission on innovation for climate change, food security, and agriculture. And very excited from this perspective of the commission about the cooperation, the work that we're doing together with the ministry, and because I think that you mentioned the role that the need to learn from international experience, but India has made many advances in this area and has many exciting things that are taking place right now. And by documenting this, I very much hope this will be of use not just for India, but for the entire world. And one of the things we would like to do in the commission is highlight the experiences of India so that other countries can take lessons away from that experience.
Thank you, Professor Kremer, for this valuable insights, and it's been really encouraging for us to have you here on this platform, and it only shows that more than almost 200 people have been consistently there on the platform, even though it's beyond 8 p.m. today, and we have been getting regular queries and questions, and I'm sure there will be many more, but I would like to extend thanks from my entire team at Karmayogi Bharat. The entire team was very excited to have you on this forum, and we look forward to hearing more from you and your team on the discussion forum that you will set up on the Karmayogi Bharat platform. I'm also thankful to Praveen Pardeshi, sir, Member Capacity Building Commission, under whose initiative we were able to do this. And really grateful and thankful to you, sir, for building the connects and helping us organize this session, and look forward to many more sessions on Karmayogi Talks and similar topical issues in the days to come. And Professor Manoj Ahuja, sir, who has always been guiding us, helping us, leading us in any sector that he has worked, whether it was in education or agriculture now, and we have greatly benefited from his insights in everything that you do. And we continue to, agriculture is a very important subject, sir, for Karmayogi platform, for the entire stakeholders, for the entire agriculture scientists, extension workers and all. So we do have some courses on related to agriculture, water conservation, but we look forward to being in touch with your team, sir, so that we are able to bring in more such courses and more such discussions with experts, which can address the real issues to benefit the entire government workforce. So once again, from the entire team of Karmayogi Bharat, I convey my heartfelt thanks to Professor Kremer, Manoj Ahuja, sir, and Praveen Pardeshi, sir, for giving your time for this session of Karmayogi Talks. And a special thanks to all those who have joined today. And the entire session, this session will be available on our portal as well as on our YouTube channel. So those who have missed it or people who have missed it can always go back and join this. Thank you once again, and a very good evening and good day to Professor Kremer, depending on which part of the world he is in.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.